Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, June 24th, 2021, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, well, this is the last video in part two of my video series looking into the accounts of the quote unquote giants or large hominids, I like to call them, international. And this last video in the series takes us to Australia. So we pretty much covered all the bases across the earth here. And, we end up in Australia here where quite a few accounts. We're going to cover most of them. Some of them are short, other ones are a little bit longer, but they are just amazing. And I think you're going to like hearing about them. And, this is the only channel I think on YouTube where you're going to get a pretty in depth look at the accounts of the giants. I mean, even in the lectures by the people who specialize in looking into the giant question, you're only going to hear about a couple of accounts. It's all they can really mention in the lecture because they have to, have a sort of start and finish a couple of hours. It's impossible if you were to look at, all the accounts that I posted here, thanks to Chris Leslie on his Greater Ancestors site here. Of course, Chris Leslie deserves a lot of thanks for compiling these accounts into one, site where you can go look at them. But, this is the only channel on YouTube where you're going to get the actual accounts of the giants, specific to the areas where they might have occurred. So, that in a way is unique to this channel, but also what we can know about the giants as well. Because, for instance, a lot of researchers, Jim Vieira, Hugh Newman, etc., Fritz Zimmerman, they like to talk about the double rows of teeth, which is, just incredibly fascinating about these large skeletal remains. But as we found on this channel, there was also cases where there were more teeth in the mouth than what we consider normal by today's standards in human beings, where there were like sets of extra molars in the jaws of some of these giant hominids. So again, suggesting all the different configurations, skull configurations, and all the different types of phenotypes and morphologies. I mean, the past must have been so fantastic that you have to look at it almost as if the earth was some sort of alien planet, with all sorts of alien type beings on it wandering around. So, this is why it's so easy for people to jump to the whole alien invasion thing, because of the stories of the Bible or whatever it is, where all these things could be just simple cargo cult happenings in the far distant ancient past, where you have primitive civilizations on one side of a planet, and on the other side you have ultra advanced civilizations, is similar to what happened to these people during World War II. If it happened then it could happen any time in the past. Okay, and evidently, this is why something about the past is hidden from us, because it isn't quite what we think. And because when you want to look at the history of the giants, I mean, just all these accounts in Australia somewhat prove the whole notion that they lived up into historical times. And just nowadays, there don't seem to be many around of the size that there were just 100 years ago, for example. So that's something interesting to think about when you think about all these accounts of the giants. And you know, Australia here features heavily into historical accounts of the giants, which is just fascinating. And I think you're going to be equally as fascinated by these accounts as I am. But even this very first one that we're going to go to, because it sort of crosses the alternative research boundaries here with possibly Bigfoot, not this one, this one here. this Botany Bay 9'7" alive, and apparently is something that's taken from the early days, of settlement time there in the 17th century and 18th century. So here's one of these interesting accounts where this guy seems to be almost like a Bigfoot that they captured here, but yet, human in so many ways. And if you didn't know about the research that David Paulides did of missing 411 fame that I often talk about with that and the UFOs here on YouTube here, on my YouTube page here. So he did, he collected samples. According to him, he collected something like 100 something samples of Bigfoot hair and other samples of supposed Bigfoot samples, and had an independent laboratory look at the samples, paid for it, in which, four PhD academics, evaluated the data from it and created a paper about it. And it seems to be that Bigfoot, what we take as Bigfoot in North America here, is actually some sort of humanoid type creature. It has more human DNA in it than anything. It's not quite human DNA because they had the follicles from some of these hair samples. It's not quite human DNA, but has a lot of human DNA in it. So, what is this thing that's living in the wilds here? And, a lot of people say, well, where are they? And all this kind of stuff. Well, they probably living underground. And how come they haven't been found? It seems like we found everything. Human beings have been everywhere on the planet and they found everything. But apparently, if these creatures aren't intelligent like human beings, perhaps they can't speak like human beings, but yet are just as intelligent. Their vocal cords don't lend to that, or the structure of their mouths, or whatever it is, but still just as intelligent. And, wherever they hide in some underground chambers or whatever it is, are so well hidden, they're expert at it. Of being hidden, remaining hidden. That's what they're expert at. If they have our ingenuity and whatever, why couldn't it be, in some perfect way that they hide themselves somewhere underground, most likely, like their ancestors did? And what are these creatures exactly? I've sort of postulated on my channel here that there's been created, they're genetically engineered organisms. So probably we are too, from this advanced society that evidently was in the past, that was, cutting stone with, machine tools and stuff like that, and bioengineering corn and maize and all that kind of, cavemen couldn't have done any of that stuff. It's as simple as that, So what are these Bigfoot? It's not a northern ape. That's the rabbit hole that you're led down and everything. Meanwhile, David Paulides did actual research into this thing, and this thing is not some sort of animal. It's mostly human, or has mostly human DNA in it. Okay, so if you're into the whole Bigfoot thing and you're not having considered that, maybe you should start considering that, because, here we're going to look at an account that seems to be like one of these Bigfoot type creatures captured in Australia here, with hair all over his body like a Bigfoot and everything, and the size of one and bigger, maybe, who knows, but, and he's obviously can be communicated with, and they brought this thing back. So listen to this whole thing, because it's fascinating. A description of a wonderful large wild man or monstrous giant brought from Botany Bay. There have been many various reports concerning this most surprising wild man or huge savage giant that was brought from Botany Bay to England. Numbers of people arguing and disputing about his enormous size, but to prevent further contending, the following is sufficient to satisfy the reader, as many thousands have seen him in Plymouth, where he was landed alive and in good health. A gentleman of this country, being lately in Plymouth, was curious enough, for he took a view of the giant, he being the sort that first that ever was brought from Botany Bay to this kingdom. Therefore, this gentleman of veracity brought the printed account of him, which gives a description of the wonderful size, form, and shape, features, and complexion of this astonishing giant. Also, an account after the manner that he was taken by a crew of English sailors and brought over from Botany Bay, and explained in the following manner. This surprising monstrous giant was taken by a crew of English sailors when they went on shore to furnish themselves with fresh water at Botany Bay. To their surprise, they beheld at a distance three of the most surprising, tallest, and biggest looking naked men that have been in memory of this age, turning towards them, which much affrighted the sailors, caused them to make expedition on board the ship for the safety of their lives, leaving the cask of water and the quantity of good old rum which they had in a keg to refresh themselves and make merry. When three savages got to the seaside, they stared at the ship for a long time with wonder and admiration. One of them, having got the keg of rum, he he tasted, spit it out, and shook his head. Another did the same, but the third drank plentifully and began to jump about in a frightful, wild manner, shouting and making a hideous noise. The other two giants went off and left this one enjoying the keg of rum, who drank to such excess that he dropped on the ground and lay as if dead. The sailors went on shore well armed and found this monstrous body motionless. They bound him with ropes and with much fatigue got him on board the ship, where they secured him with iron chains, where he slept upwards of 24 hours before he was awake, and was kept chained during the passage. He he shewed not the least token of illness at sea. He came in the ship Rover, Captain Lee, to England from Botany Bay, and landed at Plymouth November 29th, 1789. Ladies and gentlemen in great numbers honored him with their company, and has been by thousands of people, and all acknowledge him to be the greatest curiosity ever seen in England by the oldest man living. He brings such a monstrous overgrown size, and being the first ever brought from that country, Captain Lee determined to bring him to London. He is much tamer and not so savage in temper as might be expected. Isn't that interesting? That his demeanor is not this whole savage wild man thing, but he seems rather tame, right? And then we gone over, and I'm not going to mention it again, though, but I should, about the good giants on the channel and the whole thing about these giants. And they seem to be not these sort of savage creatures that are, cannibals and all that kind of stuff. It's all nothing but propaganda by our species against another species of hominid that we mostly got rid of, but not everywhere, because these giants lived up into contemporary times. And then something happened to them, seemed to degrade somewhat from even just 100 years ago, or a couple of 100 years ago, like this account here. So he's 9 feet 7 inches high, 5 feet 10 inches broad, a remarkable large head, broad face, frightful eyes, a broad nose, and thick lips like a black, very broad teeth, heavy eyebrows, hair stronger than a horse's mane, a long beard strong as black wire, body and limbs covered with strong black hair. The nails of his fingers and toes may be properly called talons, crooked like a hawk's bill, and as hard as a thorn. In short, he is viewed with admiration and astonishment on account of his huge size. He's allowed to be the greatest. He's allowed to be the greatest curiosity in England. Train, being the largest man in the known world, though fame say there are larger in New Holland. Isn't that interesting that there are larger in New Holland where these Frisians are? Hmm, larger than 9 feet 7 inches high. That's interesting. Where all those Frisians come from, who are like 7 foot something tall, all of them. So much so that the bathroom is designed with their height in mind. You and I are not going to be there in there comfortably. But it's interesting that they mention that here. He resembles a black, but his skin is yellow. The sailors who brought him over say when they took him, he was curiously painted mostly with red. There are red, green, and blue mines where he came from. Isn't that interesting? Mining by the giants again. Delight delight in painting their skin. The captain says that before he got this wild savage into custody, he took a close view of them with the spyglass from the ship, and the other two giants that were with him, which he thought were his sons, for they looked young and little or no beard, and had a variety of red circles and spots and stripes on their bodies and limbs, which they seemed to admire. This giant is very wild and knows nothing of Christianity. He has offered to show many acts of violence, but is fond of his keeper and is more calm in his temper. He is chained round the middle, but has liberty to lie down and rise and sit, and walks some yards when he I don't know what that choose when he chooses. They take great pains to instruct him in the English tongue, and is hoped in time he will be made to talk and become a Christian. He will sometime go willingly eat human flesh if he can get it, but now now seem to alter his mind. He was long time muzzled. This is a uh, said description. Okay, so they're saying that he would eat human flesh or whatever it is. It just did they know that? Just supposing that they didn't see him eating the human flesh. It's just they would say he did, but his temperament it seems kind of docile. So in any case, I thought this was a fascinating story here, but he seems to be more like a Bigfoot by way he was described. But they seemed to take him as a human back then. They didn't say he was some sort of ape man or anything like that. Okay, so here it seems to be in a crossover and an alternative research here with Bigfoot and giants, and I've gone over this with the native peoples here in the Americas about their notions of Bigfoot and wild man. I did both of them. I covered both of them on the channel. Seem to be interwoven with each other. Okay, and this is what the reference to Bigfoot really is. It's not an ape of any sort, but more of a human type creature. Okay, not ape. Okay, and David Paulides' research proves it. Cow Swamp, one skull. So these are just pictures of some of the skulls that were found here, and you can see they're very different than ours with these sloped foreheads, and it seems they have all their teeth that seem to be worn down flush with each other as well. But here's one of these odd shaped skulls here. Cow Swamp is an area of northern Victoria, Australia, where some interesting remains were found. On October 10, 1967, Alan Thorne and Philip McCumber discovered the cranium known as Cow Swamp 1. Playing the reluctant scientist, Chris Stringer would have you believe he was pushed, but the reality is he jumped feet first into one of the hottest scientific and cultural debates on the planet. Who owns ancient remains? Is it the world's museums or the descendants of traditional societies? Of course it's the world's museums. You can't keep the history of humanity from the rest of humanity. It's ridiculous. Who thinks that? But just to be, a prick about it because somebody treated you badly in the past. Well, I have nothing to do with that. Nobody alive does. Okay, maybe their ancestors did, but they're not them. Stringer, an authority on human origins and noted for his work on the out of Africa theory of evolution, which is nonsense, jumped in because he believes science is about to be done over. The collection he works with, 20,000 specimens stored in London's Natural History Museum, is, he fears, about to be broken up. What Stringer and others, such as Cambridge University's Robert Foley, fear is that once the skulls, leg bones, hair samples, and teeth are gone, including about 450 Australian specimens, they will be lost to science because they will be either destroyed, buried, or locked away by traditional communities. That's, they don't want to give them back because this is what's going to happen to them. And why should that be? It's nonsense. Going to keep humanity from humanity based on the indigenous people's desire to just keep history from everybody. They don't want to know about it. Don't you want to? You can't know where you're going to unless you know where you came from. Simple as that. As collectively, we're collective. Our, universal vibration, whatever field generates us in the universe, because we're all generated by some sort of field, just like everything is. It's collective. It's not yours only or whatever. Get the, want to like punch these people in the head. What are you, stupid? Well, you don't want to know what its history is, you jerk? Look at this thing. It's not a human being. Look at the size of the skull. It's like it's a sloped forehead, but with this sort of vaulted cranium like the Adena, or the elongated skull, or dolichocephalic skull. It's not a human being skull. It's not a Homo sapien skull. Right, another one of these skulls found. Cow Swamp Skull 5, male Victoria, showing the massive and archaic features of this group of robust early Australians. The burial is about 13,000 years old. The long sloping foreheads, known as extreme frontal recession of skulls such as Cossack, Kahuna, and Cow Swamp, prompted the suggestion that the skulls might have been artificially flattened and deformed. Deformation by bindings or strapping boards to children's heads has occurred in various parts of the world. For example, among the Maya of Mexico and in some of the Melanesian islands north of Australia, but it was rare in Aboriginal Australia. Among Australian Aborigines, only 3 groups are recorded as practicing intentional head deformation, and there are no artificially flattened skulls in museum collections. These are groups from northern Victoria, Cape York, and Mabuyag in Torres Strait. There is no record of what type of deformation was used in Victoria, but the other 2 societies practiced infant head pressing rather than binding. In Cape York, an observed in 1852 recorded that pressure is made by the mother with her hands, one being applied to the forehead and the other to the occiput, both of which are thereby flattened, while the skull is rendered proportionally broader and longer than it would naturally have been. Okay, but there's something to be said about that. This is official, and Chris Leslie goes into it just like me. Is you can't make it bigger, no matter what happens. You can't make the skull bigger, and these skulls are bigger overall, including the CCs internally. See, if I just deform your head, none of that is going to increase. It may shape it longer or whatever it is, but it hasn't increased in volume. You see? So Chris goes over that. Don't worry about it. Cow Swamp 14. Artifacts and fresh mussel shells are included in the grave fill. By comparison of deliberately deformed Arawa of southern New Britain, male skulls with other Melanesian male skulls that were definitely not deformed, physical anthropologist Peter Brown was able to identify the changes produced by deformation. He then compared a series of skulls from Victoria, including Cow Swamp and Kahuna. Brown's studies sought to establish that Kahuna and some of the Cow Swamp and other robust skulls were artificially deformed. However, check this out. However, according to Thorne, an alternative explanation for the peculiarities of some robust skulls, such as Cow Swamp and Cossack, is that they reflect the admixture of the robust and gracile population. See, he's suggesting some sort of hybridization in here as well, but that would have nothing to do with flattening of the skulls, you see? So some hint at it in the official mainstream evaluation of this data, but they're not prepared to admit all out. This is a totally different kind of hominid altogether, you see? So they're making excuses for it in terms that only they can understand because according to whatever history they learned and whatever academics they learned, okay, it suggests to them that, just everybody should be just like us, just like we are now. So apparently, by their research and their words, we haven't changed at all since the Stone Age. So what are all these other people with all these weird skull types that are found all over the planet? See, we know the accounts, and they're not prepared to admit the accounts are true. They say that people were ignorant, they didn't know what they were looking at, even including professionals and professional academics. They don't care. They're ready to badmouth people in their own discipline. They don't care about that. Anybody who strays off course obviously is a heretic. And anybody called out on it and, excommunicated. See, that's how the scientific, church works. This is all part of, your faith in it. Similar high, flat, sloping foreheads are seen on some contemporary Aborigines living in Central Australia, who are certainly never subjected to head binding or pressing. So, see, they're survivors up to contemporary times, our times, okay? Extra large people with weird skull shapes that have nothing to do with head deformation or with any sort of pressing or binding. Okay, just another area of the world where these people existed, possibly not right now, and certainly by these accounts of the past that we're reading about on Chris Leslie's uh, website here. So, you know, things to be considered here. You look at one of these skulls; it seems extra long with the sloping forehead. Okay, rather large skeletal remains when they're measured, etc. So, very interesting there. Okay. Giant Kubu Creek skulls. So here's some more giant skulls of odd shapes. Sloping foreheads, dolichocephalic skulls, a variety of them. And apparently, it seems to be, by looking at the evidence of the past, that several different varieties of humanoids lived together in the past. More likened to a Tolkien type scenario in the past than anything. Did such an era exist? Well, it's certainly possible. And these things have to be considered based on the evidence, which you can see right in front of our faces. Okay, doesn't matter what they make of it; they're brainwashed into believing whatever it is they're expected to be believing. Okay, any straying off that path is going to wind them up in hot water. So they're not supposing those things, and they're going to go along with the program if they want to keep their jobs. Okay, measurements of the jaws here. Artificial cranial deformation in the Pleistocene, Australians, the Kubu Creek sample. Okay, so this is the same from the Pleistocene. It's not even the Holocene. This is after the ice, before the Ice Age supposedly occurred, which is nothing but baloney itself. Several authors have suggested that some Pleistocene Australian crania have been altered by artificial cranial deformation. The large sample from Kubu Creek has featured prominently in this debate. The present study reevaluates the evidence for artificial cranial deformation in this population using both a larger cranial sample and a more comprehensive set of measurements than those used in the earlier work on this subject. Additionally, random expectation statistics are used to calculate statistical significance for these examinations. The results of this study agree with prior work indicating that a portion of the sample shows evidence for artificial deformation of the cranial vault. Many Kubul Creek crania display strong shape similarities with the population of known deformed individuals from New Britain. Kubul Creek crania 1, 41, 65, and 66 show the strongest evidence for deformation, but several other individuals from the sample also show clear evidence for culturally manipulated changes in cranial shape. I love that. Culturally manipulated changes. Okay, folks, they don't know this for a fact. They're making these are complete assumptions on their part because they believe that only shape of skull should be like our skulls, and that's it of any peoples of the past. Although it's clear evidence by I just mentioned to you by living individuals in Aboriginal cultures who have these strange skull shapes. No, it couldn't be, but it exists today. See how they got you all going around in circles, and you shouldn't listen to anything they have to say. This is all gobbledygook and nonsense. The project provides added support for the argument that at least some Pleistocene Australian groups were practicing artificial cranial deformation. Okay, and here's what Chris Leslie has to say about it. No cranium binding or altering has taken place. Like many of the skulls around the Earth, these represent a race of people that are no longer in existence. The skulls are larger in brain size than average, and binding does not increase the volume of the skull, only misshapens it. The large eyes and other bones that seem to have enlarged to be enlarged are racial characteristics, and binding does not affect these individuals. Okay, peer review is left in the rear view in this case, and it's exactly what I say and some other researchers say. You can't increase the volume of the brain by head binding, just misshapings. That's all. Whatever else they suggest is nonsense because they can't admit to this. It just can't not be admitted thanks to people like Alice Herdliska who effed it up for everybody. Okay? And somebody who's clearly suffering from mental illness dictated policy on archaeology and anthropology for decades and centuries, it appears to be now. Thanks to jerks like that, we're never going to get to the truth. And everybody's going to believe all these other stories, including the alternative research, which takes you down more rabbit holes. They're funding that all, too, for a History Channel to bring you all those. So whatever I say on my channel, what's going on in History Channel, you know that's junk. Complete nonsense. Arnhem Land, Australian giant footprints. Okay, so here's giant footprints. Okay, something we can learn about giant footprints that we as researchers and what's been reported on this channel know, and other researchers haven't mentioned in their lectures, just like the teeth, with the extra molars being addressed, not just double teeth, double rows of teeth, but extra molars, the sets of extra molars, like up to 6, 8, 10 extra molars in the jaws of some of these giant that were in the Americas, okay? So all different kinds of configurations. We heard of other strange configurations of teeth as well. Besides every kind of configuration of skull type. So here are the footprints. Okay, what can we note about the footprints? Well, it seems to be, by my research right on the channel, that's nowhere mentioned anywhere else, okay? There's two sets of footprints, of archaic footprints, okay, that we're talking about from the past. You have these singular ones, which seem to represent some sort of message or some indication, some representation that is being put into posterity by the giant peoples of the past. And you have what we call footprints, okay, like sets of footprints walking across like a lake bed or a stream bed or something like that, where you would normally think footprints would occur, okay? That's one type of footprint that's found from the giants from the past, okay? And these other singular ones, for some reason, that seem to be in much harder stone that defies explanation, like basalt, for instance, or granite, for instance, not in these dry lake bed sediments that seem to be numerous footprints. So there's two different categories of footprints that we're talking about here. These multiple footprints, which seem to be somebody walking along a lake bed or a stream bed or something while the stream was still active and the lake was still there. Okay, and these singular footprints, just sort of an indication of we are here, the giants, that seem to be saying something. Okay, we discussed it on the channel before. It's the only place you're going to hear it. Nowhere else. You're not going to hear it in any lectures or any alternative megalithomania or in these other research channels or whatever it is. You're going to hear it here. It's the only place you're going to hear it. We've got it broken down into two categories. Okay, what giant footprints are you talking about? Sets of them going across, some dry lake bed or a stream, or these singular ones in ultra hard stone. Well, I mean, what was it? I mean, did they, while it was still molten hot, they put their foot in it, or, their foot was white hot, and as they melted the stone with their feet? Or were people mixing up geopolymers in the ancient past that resemble these stones? And what we're calling these stones are just big giant piles of it laying around. Well, these people had the technology to convert these type of materials at will, Why chop blocks and transport blocks when you could just grind it all up into powder and then reconstitute it later on somehow? Probably, a lot easier to transport and all this kind of other stuff. Okay, it seems like all the blocks at Saxe Weimar were molded in place in block forms and then smoothed down. They have all these smoothing marks on the outside. And it wasn't when the stone was hard and something melted them. It was that the stones were soft. They were probably a semi-soft state. They were at a liquid state at one point. They were allowed to cure for a little while, and as they were curing, they scraped them into shapes and sizes or whatever they wanted. Cut it with a nice flat piece of wood. You didn't even need metal when it was that soft, like mixable concrete. At some point during the curing process, it's just soft enough where you could just cut it with a knife or something like that and smooth it out right then and there, and do whatever you want with it. And that's what it looks like to me in Saxon Weimar. Looks like geopolymer reconstituted. So, you know, call it what you want. So here we have some footprints again, but these are multiple footprints. A Northern Territory nursing sister is searching on her land for huge footprints preserved in basalt, which she discovered 15 years ago. So these multiple footprints in basalt. Sister Ruth Heathcock believes the prints could be those of giant humans who once roamed the north. She says natives of Arnhem Land have legends about quote unquote tall people who once lived in the area. The Adelaide Museum wants photographs and casts made of the footprints if any are found. Mr. Colin McCarthy of Adelaide, who is assisting Sister Heathcock in her search, said if the prints were from humans, they would be at least 12 to 15 feet tall. Okay, so just that little short one here, and by measurements, I guess this is 1963, by the way, 20th century. Okay, they found these footprints or a footprint of an individual might be 12 to 15 feet tall. Well, that's mighty big. Wouldn't be a problem lifting big stones and bringing them around or anything like that. Now I have to make contraptions and all this kind of stuff for them. Just you and your buddies lift them up and put them right where they got to go. That's all, because you had the strength of an elephant. Chedley Park Station, 8'6", an Aboriginal giant. The Woolgar correspondent of the Townsville Herald writes, when passing through Chedley Park Station, one of the Messrs. Annings related the following. Between Cambridge Creek and the tableland, an Aboriginal has been repeatedly seen among the ridges abounding in this country. So here's a historical account of some huge individual living in the backcountry there in Australia, okay? It seems to be 100 years ago, you can still find all these 8 and 9 foot giants all over the planet living in their pockets and groups and whatnot. And, they're just remnants of them today, but nobody ever talks about them. But just over 100 years ago, there were a lot more of them. Or they got rid of them, or they got absorbed into the relative human population and devolved that way because they weren't keeping pure DNA. So, you know, He measures in statute about 8 feet 6 inches. He's well made and a powerful looking giant, stout in proportion, not suffering from gigantism or acromegaly. His foot track measures about 16, or he might be suffering, quote unquote, suffering from acromegaly. But acromegaly is just a different type of phenotype. They just don't want to admit it. Okay, the giants are DNA is expressing itself in recessive genes, and these people still have the ability to produce it, and they call it some sort of malady or something when it's not. Okay, it's just completely normal for these giant peoples that lived in the past up into contemporary times. But we want to call it some kind of weird, odd thing because we don't know our history, A, and because we live in contemporary times where we only believe that, only could be us on the planet, and that's it, and no other humanoid forms. Okay? No acromegaly. It's no such thing. It's not a disease or anything like that. It's the giant genes expressing themselves. And they express themselves in all different degrees, including gigantism, which is somewhere between human being and these giant DNA, recessive genes trying to express themselves, but they can't fully express themselves like in other peoples who can. Some who they say have acromegaly, and some who look completely normal, like the Watusi people and the Frisians. Although they have a little odd shaped things here and there, as reported, right? So a little different looking kind of skull types. The Watusi with elongated skulls, and the Frisian with sort of more blockhead looking skulls, but not suffering from acromegaly like they say the other people are, but they're not. Like the Fiji giants, for example, the Fiji chiefs and their class. Are they all suffering from acromegaly? Every single one of them? That's what they're going to say. Or they dare not say it because they make them look stupid. His foot track measures about 16 or 17 inches from toe to heel, and his single stride is over 5 feet. This monster blackfellow is always well armed, and I mean, you have to excuse all the racial remarks in these reportings, from back then, racist remarks by these people. That's how it was back then, unfortunately. Human beings are just dumber than stumps, but we got to learn how to be better. This monster blackfellow is always well armed and carries an enormous shield and spears, nullas, etc. He's invariably accompanied by 3 white jinns, who carry most of his tremendous weapons and procure him food. This story was partly confirmed by a digger who, being in search of his missing horse, happened by accident to stumble across this giant's great tracks. I was so taken aback, said Bill to me, that I had not heard my horse's bell close by. I should have given it up and made tracks. You bet. I kept my weather eye open and the old shooting iron carefully loaded until I got among white men again. Okay, so it's racist report from 1880 about seeing, these giants, huge guys, 8 foot 6 tall and stout, right? Running around in the backcountry there in Australia, all right? Not suffering from gigantism with respiratory problems and all kind of stuff, but busy hacking people down with their giant weapons and whatever. Okay, so again, the past, folks, is something incredible, more like into some alien planet or whatever it is, but it's not. It's all homegrown, folks. No aliens involved. Okay, that's the rabbit hole they got you going down, or angels for that matter. Whether the angels, you believe the angels were the aliens, or you believe the angels were just angels, or whatever it is, it's all nonsense. Okay, is there some truths being said in the Bible about giants? Whatever, yeah, maybe some. If it truths about anything, they might mention a table, a chair, a banana, whatever. I'm just saying, olives and straw and gold and whatever it is. That's all real stuff, right? I mean, does it prove the validity of the Bible? Nobody knows who wrote it, whatever. Says nobody understands it properly anyway. Go see Bill Donahue, Hidden Meanings of the Bible, and you'll understand everything about the Bible. Blackfellow's giant axe. So this is an axe. 2 men were engaged digging on Mr. Swan's Byron estate. Glen Innes last week when they found a blackfellow's axe of great size, yet perfectly shaped. It is a common thing for bushmen to discover Aboriginal axes, but this particular one is several pounds in weight and could have been wielded only by a giant. It resembles the old fashioned battle axe, and its size can be imagined from the fact that the head measures 10 inches between edge and haft and is 8 inches across. It was uncovered by a landslide and had probably lain hidden for many years. It is in a good state of preservation and of extremely hard stone. It has been sent by Mr. Swan to the National Museum and is in all probability unique. Well, no, probably not unique at all, but people don't know what they're looking at or whatever it is. And attributed for all kinds of things and kept as souvenirs and thrown in the garbage and buried in the backyard and put in, a stone flower garden, all this kind of stuff. And that's why we don't know our past, because we just weren't interested much in it until recently. Blackfellow is well over 7 feet. Again, more contemporary accounts, historical accounts, and historical times about giant, you know, humans living in the backcountry of Australia here. Did they live up into contemporary times? And why, just 100 years ago, we can hear accounts of them being 8 and 9 feet tall all over the world, including Greenland, we heard, okay, other places where they were this tall. And what happened since then, you know, just as close a time period as that, okay? Something happened to the physical nature of the planet. Okay, so obviously killed off all these giant animals in the past and something has been changing on the planet and the physical nature of this planet since then. What is it? Some unseen thing that can't be seen exactly. Okay, what is it? Okay, well, I say it's gravity. It's changed. Okay, it seems quite obvious. I gave proofs for it in biological, gravity studies here right on my channel about how cells grow in different gravities. And whatever you believe gravity is, again, folks, look, flat earthers are laughing, but it's not the phenomena that they say it is. So maybe you should reconsider what it is. Australian Aborigines were once noted for their size, and most of the men half a century ago stood well over 6 feet. The height of those who lived hundreds of years ago must have been tremendous, as is shown by their remains, which may be dug up almost anywhere along the River Murray. They are often to be found in rows, each one including half a dozen or more complete skeletons. Generally, the jaws are huge and square, and though they are all loose, every tooth is present. The average height of these men must have been well over 7 feet, again with the perfect teeth, as we've heard about all over from all the accounts everywhere internationally and especially in the Americas with their perfect teeth. Okay, why perfect teeth? Why is this mentioned over and over and over and over again? Okay, so if you want to take a look at Victorian times and the teeth that they had back then, the atrocious, rotten teeth that they had, and all the horrors of early dentistry and all this kind of stuff, this is why they're always commenting on the teeth, because it defies their sensibility. Well, how could they possibly have better teeth than they do? They're busy, taking care of their teeth just like we do. Yet we all get all cavities and everything else. Okay, why would he? Well, maybe the giant's physiology was as such that they weren't susceptible to a lot of these things, but we are, because we are somehow derived from them, most likely, based on all the evidence on this channel that I discuss about a more advanced civilization in the past and all these biologically engineered organisms that are all over the planet and biologically engineered plants like corn. Many of them, not just corn. You think it's just, well, we made corn, that's the only one we're doing, that's it. We'll just freak everybody out in the future and everything, and they'll know that some advanced civilization was here in the past, and corn is the only thing that we're doing. See, if you could do corn, then you do a whole bunch of other things. It's probably most of the stuff that we're eating, folks, all created by some beings in the past who had superior knowledge to us. Most likely giant beings, you know? So that was that. Black Giant of Woorolgan Station. That's an awfully long name there. The Black Giant, again, more accounts. Some station Aborigines. Years ago, there was a black fellow on Woolgan Station, Richmond River, called Big Harry, who was the biggest Aborigine in New South Wales and was known as the Black Giant. His parents, who belonged to the same station, were also bigger than average. Well, they all have gigantism, I guess. It's congenital in some people, obviously, huh? That's what they're going to say? Yeah, prove that one, jerk. Though the tribesfolk thereabouts were a sturdy, robust lot. Harry's father was known as Black Jack to distinguish him from Yellow Jack and White Jack, who also worked on the run, writes E.C. Sorensen in the Australasian. Black Jack was kind and listen to this. Black Jack was a kind and peaceable man. It was said that he and his wife Ellen had never had a quarrel, and after Ellen died, he became a recluse. His home was a well-built bark hut half a mile away from the blacks' camp, where his two sons, Big Harry and Tawayan, lived with a mob of other blacks. Not even a dog shared Black Jack's lonely campfire. Dog want too much meat, he said, and make fleas sit down all about my house. He had a neat bunk and table, and everything in the hut, which was lighted at night with a fat lamp, was kept clean and tidy. Often he was seen in the morning sitting on his bunk, gazing into a mirror and carefully combing his black beard, and sometimes he was noticing at the fire with a jam tin making candy. Okay, so again, we hear about the demeanor of these large people who are living in the historical past, these awfully large people, okay? Were they the fierce cannibals that they're reckoning these people to on all the Nephilim and Anunnaki channels and all? These are the same people we're talking about. Come on, folks. They're full of crap, okay? It's all bullshit, right? Done by the controlled opposition to bring you down those rabbit holes so you stop thinking about what the past could have been, okay? And more advanced civilizations coming from the well ancient past, okay? And how many there were and how many times this planet's been destroyed by something external to it that expanded it, changed the gravity of it, all this kind of stuff. You have to think about those things, okay? And that happens every once in a while. And what's going to happen next? It might be gone forever, the Earth. Who knows? But next time that the sun burps or hiccups or whatever happens with the sun, who's a giant anode in space connected to a giant electrical grid, naturally occurring electrical grid. Port Broughton, 7-foot Aborigine, skeleton of giant Aboriginal, 100 years old. Mr. C. H. Noble found a 7-foot skeleton of an Aboriginal on his property near Port Broughton. Experts say that the body was buried there probably 100 years ago. The skeleton will go to the Adelaide Museum, so all these skeletal remains taken to the museums there. Are they still there? Does anybody in Australia know? Can anybody in Australia tell me? Are these giant skeletons still, there in these museums? Because it seems like all over this planet, where at one time a lot of these skeletal remains were up for exhibition, including at the Columbia Exposition here in the United States, are all gone now and can't be found. Isn't that interesting? And it just so happens that the Smithsonian was buying up skeletons left and right all over the place, as we found out from the accounts of the past. What about those in the accounts of the past? All the naysayers and skeptics and all this kind of stuff. What about all that stuff? Huh? What do you got to say about that? Okay, just because you hate the Bible, you got wrapped on the knuckles, you don't believe God or the Bible or whatever. What does that have to do with anything? It doesn't have anything to do with it. It was just because people who believe in the Bible are trying to prove the existence of the giants or whatever it is. That's a totally different subject altogether on this channel. It has nothing to do with the Bible or anything. Does it support the Bible? Very little. There's a whole lot of Bible there. Okay? There's a lot of real things mentioned in it. So the giants were, as by the Bible's, estimate, the giants were real in the past. Okay, we know that and everything. Does it prove, well, the Bible and everything that goes on? Well, better get to work at proving the rest of it, because that's just a little part of it. You know. So whatever side you're on, I don't care what side you're on. It's all a big waste of time. You're going to find out about the reality of the giants on this channel, what they were, and they weren't cannibals. It's all propaganda nonsense you can hear on these other channels. People making millions of dollars writing books, and Budcat 7 here eating, Chef Boyardee out of a fucking can. All right? Port George Fourth, hundreds of 7-footers, wild area, people by giant natives. Several years ago, exploration and scientific expedition chartered the schooner Koala of 22 tons and made a comprehensive investigation of the northwest coast from Broome to Wyndham. Alligators abound in the rivers, and the country is mostly heavily timbered. Port George 4 mission station, which it is believed was sighted by the missing aviators, is conducted by Messrs. Wilson and Patton, who with their wives have done valuable pioneering work and produced a veritable Garden of Eden with tropical fruits, flowers, and vegetables. The surrounding country is described as being well grassed and fed by fresh running streams. According to the members of the expedition, the natives of this section were reputed to be quarrelsome, but Mr. Wilson reported that their quarrels were tribal affairs and he had never been molested. These Aborigines carry a distinct strain of Malay blood, which is the case with many tribes on the northern coast of Australia, as Malays have frequented the northern seaboard for centuries in search of pearl shell and trepang, which find a ready sale in the markets of the Far East. Giant turtles are soon on the beaches, coming ashore to lay their eggs in the sand. Fish abound in the water. If the airmen have alighted near the coast, they will thus have ample opportunity to obtain food. Farther inland, plenty of game should be available. The exploration expedition mentioned previously was able to converse with the Aborigine only by means of signs, and even the black men with the party could not make themselves understood. This is interesting. The inhabitants of one small island lived entirely in the open, having no huts. When they first approached by the white man, they disappeared into the scrub and later appeared armed with spears. At a small mission station on the shores of Napier Broome Bay, found a quarter of a century ago by Spanish Catholic brothers, it was ascertained that the brothers had often been attacked by hostile black men. Two of them bore marks of spear wounds received in the encounter. On the Forest River, which runs into Cambridge Gulf near Wyndham, is an Anglican mission which was under the charge of Reverend E.R. Gribble for 15 years until last December. The blacks of the coast are described as particularly well set up and well nourished by the ample food supplies available. Hundreds of them are said to be nearly 7 feet tall. There is practically no settlement in the wild area between Fort George and Wyndham, a distance of 200 miles in a direct line, and it might be possible for the missing airmen to remain in the bush for some time before getting in touch with civilization. So just a side report on these missing airmen, but there happens to be talking about these 7-foot tribes there, and it's just unexplainable. Again, like the Frisians or the Watusi or the Fiji chiefs, just more people that can't be explained to people in Greenland, can't be explained by modern science as to why they are so tall. They should be the same size as every average person in the world, but they're not, you see? And they have to be able to explain it, and they can't. And their theories on height and growth are all no good and out the window based on their own studies that they admit. We've stopped growing and there's no reason for it. Based on their own theories, we should just keep on growing and growing. But their theories apparently are wrong, according to them. You see? So they can't explain it. Well, you better start explaining fast because we have all the proofs of this on a planet and it harkens to a different past than what we are taught. Okay, and with the existence of these people who exist in the past, these much taller people, well, that seems to imply a whole bunch of things, don't you think? Gigantic blacks, a 7-foot tribe. This is a very interesting one from 1930, I believe it is. Giant blacks with Latin words. Gigantic blacks standing almost 7 foot and armed with great 16-foot spears, 16-foot spears. Australian blacks who speak a strange dialect. Oh, strange dialect like the Frisians who speak the Frisian language. Okay, who are all 7 foot tall and better. I see. Okay, yeah, but they're human. They're mostly human. No, people. They're all guys. Look, they're just all these people have the giant DNA being expressed either outrightly or recessively or whatever, and they maintain it. They maintain it. Giants live among us that have mostly this giant DNA in them, and we don't have it. They have it. The missing DNA, and they're not going to talk about it. They're going to, whenever they look at it, they're always going to say it's some sort of malformation of what we are, because we are the center of the universe. You see, there can't be any other. So this is where they all go wrong, and everything they say is nonsense. You just throw it all in the garbage. Just light it on fire, throw it in the garbage, start from scratch, right here on this channel. So they speak a strange dialect, unlike their caveman prototypes on the Kimberley coast! Exclamation point. A rich field awaits the anthropologists and philologists on an island in the far northwest Australia. For there one will find natives who can draw the shape of Old Dutch cannon on the sand, and whose language bears a striking similarity to Latin. Isn't that weird? Living on Montgomery Island, they are a dwindling race. For 10 years ago, they could be numbered in the hundreds, while today there are but a scattered few dozen. They can be seen in their crude catamarans fishing for dugong or on the reef spearing fish left in pools by the fallen tide. Far removed from civilization, they have remained practically untouched by white influence, beyond a visit from an occasional beachcomber in search of trochus, bechtemere, or turtle shell. And their only conception of a city is the tiny mission station at Port George 4, some 50 miles away, visited in time of famine. At the time of our visit, we had anchored our 12-ton lugger some 6 miles off the island, owing to it being surrounded by a reef of some 20,000 acres. This was necessary as the tide rises and falls 35 feet, and low water would damage the boat by bumping. In the distance, we could see a tiny speck put off from the shore, which turned out to be an old man paddling a catamaran, a crude craft composed of mangrove logs pegged together. He was carrying 5 or 6 great spears, and in addition to his lubra and native dog, had a fire burning merrily on a flat stone. As he came nearer, he appeared apprehensive of our friendliness, but his fears being allayed, became alongside and made fast to the stern of the lugger, the woman hiding her face in her hands. The dog growled at the unusual sight of the white man, and as the old man looked up at us, he uttered one word, aqua, at the same time splashing some water to illustrate his requirements. He was brought on board and given water, while a pannikin was passed over the side to his wife, who was reluctant to come on board. Water is scarce on Montgomery Island, and though the natives attain it by digging, it is very unpalatable. His thirst being appeased, he squatted down under the awning, and when we pointed to the water and said aqua, he repeated the word. We then pointed to the dog and received the astonishing reply, caningo, an apparent mixture of canine and dingo. It's very interesting, this mixing of languages here, especially being Latin. Okay. As Harry Hubbard reports, that some of the findings from the Illinois caves, from the artifacts there, had some sort of hybrid language of Latin and Greek and other languages all mixed up in there. That his friend, his buddy, Paul Shafranki, who's an expert at deciphering stuff from the military, says it's some sort of hybrid language. Could this hybrid language been some sort of hybrid language, sort of an international language used in the past? Well, maybe. Besides Sanskrit and everything else that we can think about, going into a past much further. A pencil was produced, and his strange answers written down as he pointed to various objects, though his vocabulary was limited, for he had no words for the unfamiliar buckets, hurricane lamps, or cinematograph camera. But to our astonishment, a rifle was no novelty to him, for he pointed to it several times. For a head, he gave pita, which is allied to capita. One could literally converse with this wild man, for when ashore for crocodiles the next day, he acted as a guide and gave a laconic mat when we, quote unquote, when we bowled one over, signifying that the particular crocodile was in truth morte. Their cars being sensitive to the sound, their ears being sensitive to the sounds of the bush, they were alarmed at the rifles and then kept in the background with hands to ears when one was being fired. But we soon found that though rifles may have been a little novelty, they knew of cannon of the old Dutch type found on the boats of the early buccaneers. For this particular man drew the crude outline of one on the sand. We speculated as to the possible wreck of some early Spanish or Dutch navigator, and the cannon had been located by these natives in their travels amongst the hundreds of islands, for it was certainly a cannon he drew. We left him and the remnants of a once numerous tribe, but it came as a shock for we white men to find a language distinctly like Latin spoken in this remote spot. Possibly it was also pleasant for that old native who paddled across 6 miles of shark infested water to pay us his respects in a dialect we could slightly understand. Words have been found in the Aboriginal dialects with similarity to Latin roots, but they form a small proportion of the vocabulary, said Professor Radcliffe Brown, commenting on this article. He thought an anthropologist would have to be very skeptical, for it was more likely to be a coincidence. Of course. Of course, it's a coincidence, because there can be no other version of the past except theirs. Okay? You must listen to our version of the past. Das ist alles. You Schweinhunds. Daintree Aboriginal Amazons, the Amazon tribe of Aboriginals, giant women warriors. Okay, I'm not going to read this article now. I'll read that another time, but I found that extremely interesting. I'm going to read that another time. Menenegi, gigantic skull, Aboriginal skull, a phenomenal specimen. One of the ablest scientists who have visited Australia is Dr. Hermann Klatsch, professor of anatomy at the Heidelberg University, Germany. Has recently made in Adelaide He recently been in Adelaide attending the Science Congress and takes a profound interest in the study of anthropology. In fact, during the 3 years Professor Klosch has spent in Australia, a great deal of his time has been occupied in gleaning personal information concerning the history and customs of the Australian Aboriginals. Before leaving for Sydney and on Tuesday afternoon, the professor was seen by one of our representatives at the laboratory of veterinary surgeon Desmond. Here, the scientist was making a close inspection of the skull of a blackfellow which Mr. Desmond had obtained from Lake Albert near Meningie. Meningie. The specimen was an old one and highly valuable from a scientific point of view because the jaws and teeth, which showed abnormal development, abnormal, okay, quote unquote, whatever they say is abnormal is probably normal for the giants, but abnormal to us. Okay, so I think the giant peoples of today should take offense at this stuff. Okay, and I'm going to do a video about it. Okay, they are the descendants of the giants, and all these, dispersions are cast upon them by all this old, crummy propaganda that was waged against them in the past. Okay, they should, get rid of that because it's not true. None of it is true. Okay, perfect jaws and teeth, not eating red meat, not cannibalizing, not doing any of those things. Simple demonization of the enemy, propaganda. We do it today. We do it for forever because we're punks. And we have the capacity to be. Or the opposite if we want. Were remarkably well preserved. This is the teeth, the jaws and teeth. Considering the great age of the skull, the Aboriginal must have been a gigantic fellow. The professor told the reporter that the antiquity of the specimen was proved by its state of preservation. There was an entire absence of organic matter, but the skull was not petrified. It, it was in a similar state to portions of a skull found by the professor at Como at the entrance of one of the beautiful caves near the River George near New South Wales. There seem to have been these seem to have been inhabited for thousands of years by Aboriginals who had left enormous quantities of oyster shells near the mouths of the caves. While digging among these shells one day, he chanced to come across some human bones at a depth of between 2 and 3 feet, and making a careful search, he brought to the surface the relics of two skeletons and some bones belonging to a third individual. Again, similar to that in the Americas and in Europe, okay, that these giants were buried in these shell mounds. All right, this is something that may refer to a certain time period, a certain epoch of the giants, okay, where all these different mediums may suggest these different epochs of the giants, or the type of medium that they preferred to be buried in: stone, shell, you see, sand, whatever it is. They were interested in these kind of things. These things had meaning to them, probably in the utility of which was put to use by them. Known for stoneworking, the stone giants. They're not stone giants like in Noah's Ark film with, what's his face there from Gladiator, Russell Crowe. Okay, where they show these Anunnaki, the Nephilim as these stone man, literal stone man. It's not what it is. They weren't made of stone. They didn't have stone armor, just like the legends of the northeastern tribes here in North America. Okay, that's not what they did. They worked with stone. You see, that's how they convey the myth and the fairy tale, but based on some truth. Okay, obviously, no creatures lived that made of stone ever. Okay, just things that we can relate. Your nut job. Okay, the bones were broken, and as there were no signs of the ground around being an ancient burial place, he came to the conclusion that the bones were left by cannibal natives a long time ago. They're all, and if they were cannibal natives, they were our size, Homo sapien size, average size. Okay, like we know today they exist. No giant ones, like the Watusi living in peace, eating millet or whatever it is they're eating over there with their regular tribesfolk that they don't eat, but just seem to rule over quite peacefully and amicably. Or else, I guess the other tribe, the smaller, average size tribe would just go away, right? Well, that's how the Adina and Hopewell were, and some punks, probably a bunch of crooks, made their own tribes there in the Hopewell and Adina and destroyed their society there. Some seditionists, whatever. They didn't like to be ruled by the Adina anymore and put an end to them. And also possibilities of the Adina suffering from what I call gravity sickness. We could cover a variety of categories. We'll talk about that some other time. Nobody ever talks about that. But it's an interesting concept anyway. The specimen in the possession of Mr. Desmond is interesting for several reasons. A curious feature is the formation of the forehead, the ridge of which is very pronounced. This is a character to be observed in the skull found by Professor Klotch. In my specimen, he said, the jaws are much broken up, but in this one they are relatively well preserved. They contain all the teeth except one in the upper jaw. This is an incisor and has been knocked out, no doubt, in accordance with tribal custom of the natives, which is practiced even to this day. How interesting is that? Wonder why? Maybe providing some sort of and again, it's going to show evidence of this. I'm going to mention in one of these articles here. They were doing some sort of task with their teeth that was common among all of the giants. Okay, whatever task it was, whatever type of dietary considerations there may be, the shellfish all over the place, were they cracking them open like sunflower seeds? Maybe. It's an extremely old skull, but I have no idea of the exact age. It evidently belongs to a man about 50 or 60 years old because the sutures have disappeared from the top of the head. Is that because they disappeared from the top of the head, or they never were there and they are in some other location that can't be seen? Because all sutures, whether they be giants or not, regular human beings disappear in the future. So where were they actually? Maybe they weren't in the places where this guy was looking for them. As reported before, we heard about this before, even in Harold S. Gladwin and Weatherville there in Arizona with the dolichocephalic skulls and elongated skulls they found there in the Americas, in North America, that you don't know about. It would be impossible to find such a beautiful set of teeth combined with so great an age in any other race in the world. In this respect, the Australian blacks are peculiar. Okay, they're likening it to that. But it has nothing to do with that. It's that all the giants of the past had perfect teeth because they weren't eating red meat. And what or their physiology was as such as that they were not susceptible to the diseases, dental diseases like we are, for whatever reasons, or something that they ate, something in their diet that preserved their teeth, or their ability to clean their teeth because they were sophisticated. Listen to this. The rows of teeth are remarkable for the parabolic form of the arch. The narrowness of the palate closely resembles that of the anthropoid monkeys. The complete formation of the upper jaw nearly represents the whole human snout. The lower jaw is of extraordinarily large dimensions, the ascending branch being very broad and massive. Despite this wonderful development of bone, the teeth are so large that they are crowded out of position. Especially is this noticeable on the right side of the lower jaw, where the disturbance of the incisors has turned one inward and the other outward. One of the canine teeth on the same side is displaced outward and downward. Such irregularities are sometimes observed in human beings in the present time, the size of this jaw being out of proportion of the size of the teeth, but they are seldom met with in aboriginals. Okay, this could be, and even in current times, and even in average size human beings, we all have the giant DNA in us in some form, shape, or another. Could it be being expressed in different ways and forms, just not completely in some people, and causing these things that we consider maladies, and they are, in fact, maladies for people who have these problems or whatever, but these are part of the recessive genes, the unknown DNA that they don't want to talk about. It all come from these giant hominids. They're trying to express themselves in ways that create problems for us normal sized human beings because of the hybridization that happened in the past. We have to consider all these things like gigantism is somebody caught between the full expression of the DNA and the expression of human DNA, and it doesn't quite form all the way. It has nothing to do with the pituitary gland. The skull might be damaged that way simply because of the problems that, and the pituitary gland could be causing this, but they're all recessive genes, and in other cases, in tribes in Watusi, are dominant alleles, not recessive genes, being fully expressed. The striking feature was the flatness of the two rows of teeth where they met. Again, these people's teeth have like ground down, doing some sort of task, although they're perfect. And that didn't give them more cavities and all that kind of stuff, apparently, right? Because their teeth are all intact. They fitted together in a vice-like fashion. They were still perfectly sound and appeared to have been ground level by means of a file, though the professor thought it had been caused by natural means. Here you go. The professor thought this, okay? It's one thing he got right. Because this was what was going on in the Americas, either on one side or both in the Americas. They are doing some sort of task that was common among the giants. During this unified race worldwide of giant humanoids and other humanoid species of every variety of the past, in some place that looked like an alien planet, but right here on Earth, everything homegrown, no aliens involved. No angels, no aliens involved, just homegrown stuff right here on planet Earth, folks. This is the only channel where you're going to hear it. You're going to hear all those flights of fancy and fanciful stories because people don't know what to make of it. They can't think that. They're basing their notion on what mainstream says and have some sort of opposite viewpoint to that, just to be contrary. Nothing in it that's true or what, except the facts that we can read in these accounts. Or you could hear these lectures by the giant people or the people who are skeptics or whatever, and they just mention a few. Okay, they're cherry picked out for whatever reasons or whatever it is. But here you're going to get all the straight dope, folks, and make of it what it really is. Professor Klash hopes that the specimens of this kind will be carefully handled when found and sent to proper quarters in the interest of scientific research. How stupid can you be, Professor? Don't you read your own stuff from your own discipline there, jerky? They're all getting missing somehow. They're all getting disappeared. Ask Burnham County Giant's footprint. So, giant footprint. So, in this case, it's a footprint. It's not tracks. Okay? So, again, we have these two different categories of footprints: tracks in one case and singular footprints in another. What does it signify? I'm telling you, it's a message. Why would it appear everywhere on the planet where giants have been with giant footprints unless they're trying to express themselves and send a message somehow? This is a message. It's not tracks of footprints, etc. And it's in rather hard stone. How do they do that? Unless the stone was soft. Okay, so they have some sort of stone soft. They have some sort of a geopolymer formula. Okay, not magic, not some kind of technology that's going to do anything with the molecular structure of stone and build such primitive things. Why? Okay, it's obviously hands-on work. All right, so it's geopolymers of some sort. They had the recipe for it. All you need is the recipe. They still can't figure out the Roman concrete. They got all the ingredients, but they can't figure out how to mix it all together and make the Roman concrete. Why? This is the 21st century. Why can't you figure it out? Well, they're missing something, as I suggest in one of my most popular videos. See, this is the free energy. Electricity was applied to these giant blocks of stone, these giant concrete structures, and cured them rather quickly. Did the ancient peoples know about electricity? Of course they did. All this stuff, and it's like making it sound like nobody knew anything about electricity until, Benjamin Franklin with lightning or whatever. This is nonsense. Of course they did. It was just like any one of us could know without spending a day in school by touching a doorknob or looking up in the sky. Remarkable stone found. A curiosity in the form of peculiarly shaped stone is on view in Mr. E.F. Sears' shop window in Clorinda Street. It is a slab of granite bearing on the surface a resemblance to the imprint of the sole of a giant foot, almost perfectly proportioned. The stone measures 2 feet 1.5 inches in length, while its greatest width was 7.5 inches. The surface has the appearance of the marking left by a crepe rubber sole. So it's left by a sole of a shoe. It is evidently a water-worn piece of granite split evenly in half by the action of water or fire, and was found on the local golf links by Mr. J. Morrison. It had probably been lying there beneath the surface for countless years, until the detrition of the earth above it, though the action of weather and traffic had exposed it to view. The resemblance to a giant human footprint is remarkable, and in fancy one may picture it as evidence of an ancient race of supermen, for there were giants on earth in those days, again with the Bible reference. Okay, so this was 1928 in the 20th century. And another one of these giants' footprints. Again, guys, and I know that there are categories of this thing, the footprints, whether they be tracks or single, and you're not hearing about it anywhere else on YouTube or anywhere else. Okay, you are experts on the giants. Okay, at the end of this thing, okay, you've been following along with all my videos, the countless hours. It would probably take you weeks to watch all the videos, months. Okay, because there's hundreds of videos here, but if you've been following along, you are an expert on the giants now, free of the Nephilim and Anunnaki stories, whatever. A real expert on the giants, okay? Even far above some of these other researchers who research giants. Okay, we've talked about any number of things about these accounts. So now you are the expert, all right? And I am the expert. You and I are the experts on the giants. Nobody else on any of these other channels are. You are right here, all right? So anyway, guys, that's the last account here from Australia, and it certainly was filled with just amazing things. And again, accounts, contemporary, historical accounts of giants just 100 years ago who are just absolutely huge. Where they all go? Okay, they were died off, absorbed. Their numbers were low. They only interbred with each other and not regular human beings. Some of these, maybe that's part of their culture, whatever. They refused to do stuff like that. That's how they preserved it. And they just died out quietly, and nobody knows about it. All right, that could certainly have happened too, folks. Is you got to consider all these things. All right, we're the real scientists here. We're doing a lot of the supposing where these other people are all set, already in what they believe. All right, there's much more to be learned from this. We're going to continue learning about it. This isn't the end of this. We're always going to be some addendums to all of the accounts that I gave here. So as long as I'm alive, I'll continue doing this, and I'll bring these things to you if I can. That's all. All right. All right, guys. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Please do hit the like button. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to this channel because you're not going to get the real dough from any of these other channels. All you're going to get is a bunch of nonsense and rabbit holes. You're going to be chasing your own tail. All right. Those people don't know what they're talking about, but they make a lot of money doing so. But it's not the truth, folks. We're learning the truth now. We're all learning it together here because we're looking at it with fresh eyes, not this old story. Those Anunnaki and Nephilim stories go way back, folks. 40 years, 50 years, whatever it is. It's done. It's just played. It's all that stuff is played. It's just done. It's not true. It's controlled opposition, probably put out by the people who wish you wouldn't think about the giants or whatever and start questioning what the past really was. For some reason, the powers that be don't want you to know that. For whatever reason, their hatred of religion or, anti-Darwinist they hate. And so, whatever it is, these other people with their own agendas, whatever, have nothing to do with the history of the giants. Nothing. Okay, we're learning about it here. All right, what really happened. Okay. Anyway, guys, Bugcat7 signing out. If I can get this to work. Peace.